Hello, hello. We are live, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Hi, folks. How you guys doing? I hope spring has been treating you well. It is spring here on the Northern Hemisphere, where I am, in Ontario, Toronto, Canada, around Toronto anyway. It's a pleasure to see you all. Today, we are going to be discussing another fabulous nakshatra here. In particular, let's see if I have a picture of it. Basically, we're going to be talking about Rohini and the god that rules Rohini, which is Prajapati. So, our plan today is that we are going to go through, we're going to discuss all of the main guts of Rohini from several sources. The main one that I like to use is Nakshatra, the Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology by Vic Dicara. I recommend you grab it because it has a whole bunch of great mythos at the end of the book that ties the story of the Nakshatras together in a great compendium of the essence of the Vedas, in my opinion. Another book we're going to be reading from, this is a free little booklet given out by Ernst Wilhelm. It's called The Energies of the 27 Lunar Mansions. Both of these books are using a translation of a text known as the Taittiriya Brahmana, as we can see here. And the Taittiriya Brahmana, we're going to talk a little bit about it as we kind of go along. Then at the very end, we're kind of going to discuss some of the basic characteristics of Rohini. And finally, at the end, we're going to discuss Rohini as given in the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras, as portrayed in the Vedas by the author named Radhe. So, thank you so much to everybody for joining. Hello, Teresa. It's nice to see you. And it is nice to be here on a Sunday with you all. Now, without further ado, let's start scratching into this. Of course, I always have a little intro. I am a tropical Vedic astrologer. I use tropical Rashis overlaid on the 27 sidereal nakshatras. There's a lot to convey there. These two systems, I think, are two wheels kind of overlapping each other. If you want to see more on this, you can check out my Age of Aquarius debunked videos, where I kind of talk more about the sidereal tropical debate. I have a whole playlist on it on YouTube if you're interested. But the main gist of it is, there's a story in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other parts of the Vedas where Vishnu was incarnated in order to defeat this evil demon. There's a demon which represents the ego, and the ego is getting too big. So the gods asked Vishnu to put this demon, the ego, in its place. So Vishnu incarnated as a midget, and the midget said, hey, if you're so big, I think that the midget asked for a boon. The dwarf asked for a boon, and the dwarf seemed so small. He tricked the ego. And the ego says, what boon do you want from me? And the dwarf says, I want 3 paces, 3 steps, 3 footsteps of space. The demon laughs and says, okay, fine, take your 3 small steps. And Vishnu says, great, the first step I'm going to make, I'm going to take the deep space of the stars. It's the nakshatras, the sidereal wheel. It's the purple here. Then with my second step, I'm going to take the local space of the tropical zodiac. And then with my third space, I'm going to take the geomantic space of the horizon, the houses, etc. Of course, in that third step, the ego realized that he was talking to Vishnu. So the ego bows its head and says, I see that I am not as great as fate, as spirit, as the energy that transcends the human experience and in which the human experience is enmeshed. That is Vishnu, the soul, the karma, the spirit. So the point of this story is to show that the deep space of the nakshatras is an entirely different wheel from the local space of the tropical zodiac. That's why I'm always showing this little story. Goddess Essence Energy says it's kind of like different layers of a world, and I would say that's a good way of looking at it. So in this series of nakshatras, I'm trying to convey the pure essence and nature of the nakshatras as they are without Rashi associations. The reason for this, Vic Dicara talks about it a lot on his channel. He's a real inspiration for what I've been doing with the nakshatras. Vic Dicara describes this idea that the nakshatras are essentially just a whole different wheel from the tropical zodiac. The point of Aries, which is a phenomenon that has to do with the revolving of Earth around the sun, Aries, because the Earth has this wobble, the sign that we call Aries is actually moving. Where the sun is on March 21st, which is our tropical idea of Aries, where the sun is positioned in the backdrop of the stars, is moving around the 27 nakshatras. 2,000 years ago, Aries was positioned in the sidereal stars of Ashwini. Now the sign of Aries is positioned in the sidereal stars, I believe, of Uttara Bhadrapada. Yes, that's correct. So, in any case, because that is the case, we as tropical astrologers using Vedic system have to see the tropical the signs of the zodiac as not married and enmeshed with the symbology of the nakshatras. So when I'm talking about Rohini here, I'm going to try to talk about it without its classical associations with whatever sign it would have been in previously in 2,000 years ago. Much of the information we read about the nakshatras has been tainted by the idea of sidereal astrology and that the signs are married to the nakshatras. In this day and age, we don't think that's the case. So that's why Vic Dicara and Ernst Wilhelm decided to get their information from the nakshatras from the one authentic Vedic text that actually gives descriptions of what the nakshatras represent. And this is a text called the Taittiriya Brahmana. This is what is being regarded as the most authentic and undistorted literature we have available on the nakshatras. It's the Taittiriya Brahmana. It's essentially a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda. It's kind of considered to be a continuation in that Vedic realm. So this is just a little bit more backdrop of what we're talking about. The nature of the distortion of the nakshatras that has happened is twofold. I'm going to give this short thrift because I've been already saying it in all my videos, but it's still important for everybody who watches these to get a sense of this. For those watching at home, you can always go forward in the video to get right into the meat of this nakshatra. But the distortion of the nakshatras throughout history has happened for two reasons. As I've said, the nakshatras have been correlated to a certain zodiac sign in the past. As well, there's associations with the Vimshotari Lord, and that's the planet that rules the first dasha period when the moon falls in that nakshatra. So everybody must know this, as Vedic people, we often use the Mahadashas. So for example, if you are born with the moon in Rohini, then you would have... I don't have it anywhere because I'm trying not to make the correlation. But Rohini, I believe, is started with... I'm not going to say it because I'm not entirely sure. But whatever first dasha begins when the moon is in Rohini, people have thought that that has something to do with the essence of the nakshatra, but there's no real evidence for this. And this is what this slide is saying. Vic Dicara has noted that the qualities of the Vimshotari ruling planets don't actually necessarily have anything to do with the nakshatras, because the Vimshotari is a newer system. That's why we emphasize this Taittiriya Brahmana only. There may be useful information with these Vimshotari lords, but it's better to regard our interpretations based on the Taittiriya Brahmana. We especially cannot treat these lords as if the nakshatras were ruled by them as if they were a dignity. So, you guys can kind of read this, basically, if the sun, we know that with, oh shoot, I thought you guys were seeing my slides, and I guess you're not. If the sun is in Kritika, or if the moon rather is in Kritika, then the sun is the first Mahadasha. So some people think Kritika has a sun-like nature. But if Jupiter is in Kritika, it's a little too sharp. Jupiter is usually good in Leo, but it's not necessarily good in Kritika. And this is the same thing with all the Vimshotari lords. We can't necessarily say the nakshatra has the nature of the Vimshotari lord. That's the first planet in the Mahadashas when the moon is placed there. So this is another distinction we make of why we're trying to read strictly from the Taittiriya Brahmana. So hopefully this isn't too confusing. Now, as we go along, we're going to look into the 4 classical nakshatra characteristics. Hello, Jessica Corrine. Nice to see you. Thanks for hanging out with us. Now, these qualities are not given directly in the Taittiriya Brahmana, and they may have been culled by cultural intuition and commentaries based on these 2 distortion points we've already mentioned. So when we read these classical nakshatra characteristics, we have to know that it's not coming from our same source books, but it's still useful just to see how they could be useful to us. These are the activity, that's active, passive, and balanced. It's the 7 qualities of the nakshatras. The sexual yoni animal, it's particularly used in traditional Indian marriage assessment. And the kingdom, and I think I've got written here that the kingdom is particularly interesting because Ernst Wilhelm has noted that the kingdom, whether it's Jiva, Dhruva, or whatever the word is for mineral, I should know it, but I guess I don't at the moment. No, that's okay. But this kingdom is regarded by Ernst Wilhelm as important information. And I should say, as I'm going through this, part of my intention here in talking about the nakshatras in this way, we really have to discern, it's important for me to discern my parampara. We talk about this in Vedic astrology and anything Vedic. The parampara is what are the roots of your information. This is the reason why I'm talking about how I'm interpreting the nakshatras here, is because there's so many different ways to interpret them. And it's important for me to convey that when I talk about where I'm getting the information for these nakshatras from, I'm trying to discern between the information that in the new idea of tropical Vedic astrology, it's actually not a new idea. It's being conveyed in our circle that tropical was always the way to measure the planets, and sidereal is a mistake that was made. Again, watch my videos for more on that. But since in this new emerging understanding, we have come to this idea that the tropical wheel is different from the nakshatras, it's important for us to discern where the roots are coming from. And that's why we are getting into the Taittiriya Brahmana. But what I've been doing is talking about these characteristics, the 4 characteristics. As well, we're going to read from another author, Radhe, at the end, that has a little bit of this classical way of interpreting the nakshatras. We want to use our discernment because there's much information about the nakshatras in those 4 characteristics and other places that could be useful to us. I want to get from the source and then dig through the garbage and find useful gems from the distorted literature. So try to keep that in mind as we go along. But I'm going to convey what my sources are at every step. So if you want to join in with me, let's rock and roll. Now, I have this in the wrong order, but essentially, Rohini's 4 characteristics, they all kind of look like this. Rohini is one of the balanced activity nakshatras. It's not active or passive. It's a combination of activity and passiveness. It's kind of like the mutable of the nakshatra world. These are all of the mutable nakshatras, if we could put it that way. It's balanced. The deva is prajapati, which is abundance. As we can see, there's an ox cart carrying hay here. And this has a lot to do with the symbolism of Rohini. We learn that the ox cart generally tends to represent having much information and having much goods. Rohini can be a good mercantile nakshatra. This is also indicated by its being a mineral dhatu kingdom. Its nature tends to be fixed/permanent, which is called dhruva. And so this is even more of its mineral character. It's a balanced nakshatra that is active and passive, and it really focuses on the mineral things in the world. Oh, and it does have its ancient ruler here, is the moon. Now, this is what I was talking about with the Vimshottari Lord. The ancient ruler, I should really change what that says, but that essentially means that if the moon falls in Rohini, that means the first Mahadasha you experience is the moon. However, we should be discerning in saying that Rohini has anything to do with the moon. For example, if any planet like the sun is friends with the moon. And if the sun falls into Rohini, that doesn't mean that it's in friendly dignity. That doesn't necessarily that doesn't mean the sun is going to do well in Rohini. So this is the distinction I'm making with these Vimshottari lords, but I digress. Rohini means growing red spot. So this is this growing passionate abundance that we see that brings the abundance of Prajapati through some kind of passion, through some kind of earthy abundance. So those are the qualities. And I guess I should say that the yoni animal is the male serpent. And this has something to do with what we see in the sexual relating of the nakshatras. When two people's moons are in the nakshatras, the Rohini character, the sexual character of Rohini, moves through this idea of the male serpent. Now again, as I mentioned, these qualities are not given in our source text, but they might still be useful. Now let's actually dig into our source text. Hello, Magisterial Warrior. Nice to see you. It's nice to see all you guys hanging out with me while we do our thing live here. As usual, folks, this is a live stream, so feel free to ask any questions. If I can clarify anything as we go along, I'll do my best. Now, I'm learning to, every time I do these nakshatra videos, I'm learning to clarify what my intention is here. We are now going to get into defining the source sutra of this nakshatra, and eventually we want to talk about how we can interpret planets in this nakshatra. Most of that information is going to be coming from Vic Dicara. In my opinion, Vic Dicara has done the most work on this subject. So keep that in mind. He does a good rendition because the symbology of the nakshatras all have their own essence and character. So Vic Dicara has taken what he knows of the essence of a planet and interpreted what he knows of the essence of the nakshatra, how that planet is going to act in that nakshatra. It's a whole different thing from the zodiac. That's why we have to move from a place of symbology with the nakshatras, because it's not as cut and dry as the planets and the signs. The signs are very cut and dry. There's friendship. There's dignity. There's exaltation. None of these things are conveyed through the nakshatras. It's a whole different world of symbols, what you have to mesh together. And that's what that's what Vic Dicara has done for us, and that's what we're going to be moving through in this next segment. What is the essence of Rohini, this abundant, materially abundant planet? Hello, Irene. My friend Irene Mack is hanging out with us here. Nice to see ya. Let's consider what Rohini's Nakshatra Sutra is from the Taittiriya Brahmana. this comes again from Vic Dicara. Rohini. Prajapati Rohini. Apaha parastad. Oshadayo vastat. I can't do it as good as Vic Dicara does, but this is our essential Vedic Sanskrit phrase here. Prajapati Rohini Apaha Parastad Ashadhayo Vastat. Prajapati is the deity, Rohini is the nakshatra, and each one of these has their own translation. Prajapati is this abundance bringer relating to Jupiter. Rohini is the red growing one. It's kind of like an erection, or it's kind of like a woman whose private parts get inflamed with blood and with, that sweet thing that area does when arousal occurs. It's like a red growing of pressure that can be applied positively to bring abundance and to bring all the good things. Apaha essentially means water. Palace of Persephone, thank you for enjoying and appreciating the insights we're giving in this series. Apaha means water. And of course we know Parastad shows, as we've been talking in all these series, you'll notice Vic Dicara has color-coded each phrase in the sutra. Sutras are kind of funny like this. It's like it's a cyclical rhythm that every sutra has. And you need to understand how the breakdown is of each of these. Maybe I should make a slide showing what I mean here. But essentially, Prajapati is the god, Rohini is the nakshatra, usually. Sometimes they'll use different names, but it gives useful information. Now, what we see is the yellow word is what is needed. That's what parastad means. It's like standing above is the yellow word, and then the result below is the blue word. What this means is water, apaha, is needed in order to bring oshadayo. And oshadayo, Ernst Wilhelm describes it as light receptacles, and I think how Vic Dicara has translated it is literally plants, herbs. Those things which bring or are the resulting result of abundance. So really, abundance through Prajapati is water above and herbs below, is really what's being said here. Prajapati means of Prajapati, literally the Lord of the born, the Lord of procreation, and the creator of the born, the birther of things. Rohini is red, increasing and growing. Apaha means water, and oshadhaya is plural, and it means plants, literally receptacles of light. So this whole aspect, this slide actually comes from the energies of the 27 Nakshatras by Ernst Wilhelm. This is a sort of a very meat and potatoes breakdown of what we're seeing in this sutra. It's a little bit blanched and sort of bleached down to very almost an abstraction that Ernst gives us here. The red growing of the creator is water from above and receptacles of light or plants from below. Now, Vic Dicara gives us a little bit more to chew on. And these translations come from Vic Dicara's Nakshatra course on his website. I highly recommend it for anybody who is interested in all this stuff. Looks like my friends here are talking about we're in a Aries eclipse right now, and it is an energy. Now I'm going to try to stick here, and we're going to stick to what we're talking about. Here is some other words for all the words inside of our sutra. Prajapati, it's progenitor and procreator. Rohini is like red girl, fertile woman, the arouser. And that's a great, like just like how when we know women classically when they're either in a mood or when spring is coming through, we see the blush of a woman. And this is why women apply blush as makeup, is there's something instinctively inside of all of us that it's like seeing a ripe fruit on a tree. Men and women and everybody, there's something that happens in our brains that we see fertility, we see virility in there. And this is kind of what this is bringing to mind. It's red girl, fertile woman, and arouser. Part of the whole consciousness of Rohini really shows us that abundance is, part of the nature of abundance is the passions of the elements merging together in a harmonious way. Now, apas means water. What we see as apaha, the root of it is apas, which is water, moistness, lubrication, and nourishment. Really, there's a lot of these nakshatras, interestingly, when you get into them, they have an almost sexual connotations to them, because the nakshatras are this base plate of creation and creativity and passion, which the Vedic people were very open to in this sort of tantric understanding of life being permeated by the same procreative principles that are applied to sexuality. And they didn't take it with any judgment, which I think is a beautiful aspect of the Vedas. Apas, with all this moistness, water, lubrication, and nourishment, it also shows the true emotional fullness of a person. A person has to be fully open to their emotions in order to apply nourishment, to apply the passion that brings herbs, plants, and vegetation, fertility, fruitful results. And that's the ox cart. Somebody with the moon in Rohini has a full ox cart of energetic connections to things that they've been passionate about and can share with people. That's really sort of my interpretation of what's happening here. So let's get into a little bit of what Vic Dicara breaks these down as. He uses a few things to sort of define Rohini. Now, the first thing I want to put, he's got another sweet little PDF that's available for free online, a quick intro to the Nakshatras, which I found the PDF for, downloaded and printed. And really, I should say, I'm learning as I go through these the things I got to do. In fact, I should write them down, and I don't have my pen. I'm going to make a picture showing the breakdown of the energy of the nakshatras, and as well, I should show where in the nakshatras, where in the tropical signs the nakshatras currently are, which, as I'm moving towards pointing out, Rohini goes from, at present, about 4 degrees and 7 minutes of arc of Gemini up to 17 degrees, 27 minutes of arc of Gemini. That's Rohini, the arouser. So, show degrees, pick of breakdown of sutra. This is only my second video in the series, and I knew that as I went along, I would be thinking of ideas of things that I've got to do. Okay, I'm glad you guys are enjoying the chat. So, to give a quick little overall picture of Rohini, the arouser, what we see happening is Rohini, the arouser. It indicates passion, drive, creativity, charisma, beauty. A muse, arousing, and inspiring. It needs water for herbs. It needs to receive water, to cultivate water, to sustain water in its own life experience. in order to produce the herbs of fertility, fruitfulness. I like the way that Vic uses herbs, because this shows that the ox cart metaphor, it has something to do with the fact that Rohini wants to be useful in specific ways to specific people. Herbs, it doesn't just say plants. I think, and this is my interpretation of what Vic has given. As we read, we're going to kind of see if I'm on the right track, and I believe I am. Herbs, different herbs do different things. You don't want to give a person ginger who has too much heat in their body. You'd be better off giving them coconut or ashwagandha, something that is kind of cooling and more kapha. So certain herbs are going to do well for certain people and certain things. This is why Rohini is useful, because they put passion, the passion of water, of fertility, of wanting to be passionate about serving the world through whatever it is they're getting into. If they're a massage therapist, they're passionate about massage therapy, and they want to learn all they can about it in order that they can come to the mercantile bazaar with an ox cart full of goods related to that thing that they're passionate about. And that's why they have specific herbs for specific ailments related to whatever it is that they're passionate about. So what we read ultimately about Rohini is that they are this creative person. We see that the progenitor's woman, this is one translation coming from the Nakshatra Sutra's website, the blue one here on the bottom left corner. That comes from Vic Dicara's Nakshatra Sutra's course. It says the progenitor's woman, prajapati rohini, needs moisture to produce fruits. And it's the same thing that we read in the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. The procreator's arousal needs moisture for plants. Different ways of reading the same sutra, of course. And here's our ox cart. So we've just gone through everything in terms of pretty much my slides. Now, the next thing we're going to be doing is reading from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. We've given ourselves a good picture of the guts of the symbols that we're reading from here. And now we're going to start getting into translating planets falling into Rohini. I'm glad to see that this information is resonating. And I'm glad to see Susie Underwood here. My trifecta, my great team is here with me. Susie Underwood, Irene Mack, Teresa, and Goddess Essence Energy as well. You four folks have been hanging out with me on so many of my videos, and that's very special to me. I'm glad to see you here. And I hope you guys are enjoying this wonderful, fabulous Sunday. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. I just love moving through Vedic consciousness. And to be able to share it with everybody here is a real gift in my life. So, we are now going to be delving into Rohini, the arouser. And this is again coming from Nakshatra, the authentic heart of the authentic heart of Vedic astrology, by none other than the one and only Vic Dicara. What a babe. And of course, the first thing that we read is similar to what we've already seen. The procreator's arousal needs moisture for plants. Prajapati is the procreator. Rohini is the arouser. Apaha is water, what is needed. And then what it produces is ashadhaya, which is plants. And Vic goes through each one of these in a little bit more symbolic detail. Now let's talk about Prajapati. Rohini's god is Prajapati. This refers to Brahma in his creative and progenitive mode. Brahma in particular is the real deity essence of Prajapati. Now, the word Prajapati is a compound of praja and apati. The first part, praja, means procreation, progeneration, and production. The second part, apati, means increasing or moving forward. So prajaapati is like procreation, praja, moving forward, consistently increasing, and always, the tension of creative passion is increased through the magic of Rohini, the red woman, the arouser. Very interesting, stimulating symbology here. What we read is that thus Rohini is a fundamentally fertile, creative, arousing, inspiring, stimulating nakshatra. Rohini itself is what we're going to read next. Rohana means to rise. Rohini indicates an aroused and arousing woman, getting a rise out of you, The word is often used to denote the color red, the color of blushing and passion. Rohini. It's interesting that the word in Spanish for red is rojo. Now, the next word we read is apaha. Apaha means water. It means moisture, fluidity, and lubrication. What we read from Vic, now remember, this is an important word because this water that we're reading about is the word that is the parastat. This water is needed for Rohini in order to operate at its fundamental best. It really goes to show you, Rohini can become very dry because it wants to produce many things for many people. But all it's going to end up with is bitter, dry, infertile, pranaless herbs, many varieties of it, unless it dedicates it through one's designated channel of passion. And the passion has to come from the heart of the person with a planet in Rohini. It has to come from what they truly, deeply are, instead of getting lost in the pragmatic function it's trying to serve others. It can do that, and it gets turned on by that even. Whatever planet is signified there, and whatever getting turned on signifies to that planet. There's a passionate being turned on that happens when that planet is applying itself from within. That's what we seek with anything in regards to self-realization. So this apaha, this water, needs to come from some passionate connection of the person to whatever they're applying themselves to. Water is moisture, lubrication, fluidity, lubrication. Water is the solvent which enables creative ingredients to come together, interact, and combine to produce life. Apaha is always a very female divinity in the Vedic mind. Similarly, Rohini is a feminine nakshatra of fertility. Female fertility requires moisture and lubrication. Juicy. Now, the next thing we're going to look up is Ashadhaya. Osha. O-S-A. Osha. And the S has a little dot underneath it. That's how you know it has that sh sound. Osha is the quickening, stimulating, arousing life force. Vegetables and herbs which nourish and sustain life are called oshada or aushada. The word aushada specifically refers to plants that dry out quickly they burn out easily, and they require a lot of water. Very interesting. So we can see that this osha is like a quickening effect. It's like an herb. Typically, it's like I said, Vic called it herbs rather than just plants. It's usually an herb that will give you, again, a specific effect, whether that's stimulating and increasing or lowering down, but usually an arousing, stimulating, whatever is needed in the body for the person to become sustainably stimulated. And because they are stimulating, they can tend to burn out the user or its own growth, and that's why it requires water, patience, a real dedication to what the use and purpose is being applied to. In this sutra, the word Oshadhayo is plural. So Ashadha is just like a singular. And then Ashadhaya is plural. And this suggests that Rohini wants to create an abundance of nourishment and inspiration for life and bring a multitude of new, inspiring, and enriching creations into being. See, again, the whole herb metaphor is really a symbol for the deeper spiritual meaning of bringing a multitude of enriching creations into being. It's a very creative nakshatra. The word Ashodhaya also implies that Rohini's fertility has an agricultural context as well. Accordingly, most visual symbols for Rohini involve a verdant tree or a basket full of harvested vegetables, like an ox cart full of hay, etc. So people with Rohini emphasis could very well be agriculturally minded people, or they apply whatever planet is in there in a way that an agriculturalist would. This is this thing that I've got to grow, nurture, take care of, and it will give me produce in the long run, which means I got to be dedicated to helping to cultivate this thing over a long period of time, so it will sustain me later. As well, the water also represents, in a way, community, or reaching out to other people, so that just like at a farm, it's not very often that you find people really doing well agriculturally with just one person. You can do it your own little garden, which is nice, but it does take a lot. Eventually, when you have lots of people, many people making light work, that's when you can really make a commune farmstead happen. So other people are implied by the emotional passion and power of apaha, of the water. Now, in summary, the procreator prajapati, the procreator's arousing woman, needs water to bring things to life. Now, what we interpret here, Vic gives us a little interpretive section, and this is really planets falling into Rohini. What we read is that Rohini is welcome wherever creative passion and attractive arousal are desired. This is almost everywhere except where unbiased, dispassionate behavior and thought is needed. So he doesn't give us much on this one because he's saying basically most planets are going to do well here. But especially feminine and benedictive planets bring out the beautiful, inspirational, creative potential of Rohini, especially the moon and Venus. This would make sense. In fact, it was anciently regarded, I should say this at this point, for the sake of everybody understanding what's going on here. Rohini was anciently considered to be the moon's favorite nakshatra, the moon's favorite wife. Because the moon, there's 27 nakshatras. It takes about 27 days for the moon to go around the zodiac. And this is why each day the moon would visit a new wife. And this is where the 27 lunar mansions came from. This is back in the days when there wasn't a zodiac. There was just the sun and the moon, because it was hard to plot the other planets back then, but they could always see the sun and the moon moving through their cycles. So there was a time when the Nakshatras was all there was, and the sun and the moon were the main parts of it. The moon going through these lunar nakshatras, these lunar mansions, this is what creates the space of the nakshatras. And, you know, really the stars are fixed in that way, and the moon moves through them. And the fact that the Rohini was the moon's favorite nakshatra, some people say is that I believe Rohini was around the moon's mula trikona in Taurus. Taurus is where the moon is exalted. It's mula trikona, which means it's a very that space of Taurus is a good place for the moon. But Taurus has shifted over the years. So that's why it's debated, and that's why Vic doesn't mention it. I'm mentioning it here because I love knowledge and anthropology. Rohini was anciently considered the moon's favorite nakshatra, but that might have been correlated with a Rashi, that being Taurus. It might have been correlated with the fact that Rohini was in the sign of Taurus. Now, Rohini now is in Gemini, which means we have to be discerning about that old fact. But in any case, Rohini still does represent this nurturing, this desire to feed something for the sake of feeding it that you know you might not even necessarily expect to get fed back. You just love to give it that water. That's why the moon is like that. It's an expression and a love that we want to give. Venus is like that too. These are two planets of love, and really love in a lot of ways is what you give. You get the love that you give. That's why we just give it unconsciously with the moon and Venus, because we enjoy it. And that's where the water comes from. The water comes from our joy. It doesn't come from a desire to get a result. That's when you get dry herbs. It comes from the desire to give to this thing. Giving to this thing is the love that I am. And that's why the moon and Venus do well in Rohini. Now, what we read is that masculine and malefic planets, as well as the nodes, aren't quite as productive here. Having planets like that, that's Mars, the Sun, Jupiter, Saturn. Saturn's kind of neuter, really. Maybe I shouldn't even say Saturn. But Saturn is a dry, tough planet to be in Rohini, as I would interpret that. But we know for sure that, masculine and malefic planets, so Saturn would work there. We got the Sun, Jupiter even, which is masculine but not malefic. Jupiter is probably the best amongst the masculine planets. And Mercury is okay too. Mercury is neutral. I'd say Mercury would be, there's Venus and the moon, which are good. Mercury is neutral. Jupiter is leaning towards masculine and less well placed in Rohini. And then we would have Sun, Mars, Saturn, and the nodes don't do as well in Rohini, because these planets imply some difficulty or challenge in dealing with passion, inspiration, creativity, arousal, romance, and so on. We have the archetypal male consciousness applying itself to, I want this water for me. I want to give this water because of a male instinct, not because of the joy that it brings, but because I have an objective that I'm trying to get out of it. And as we know from the Bhagavad Gita, we are not how do you say it? We are not entitled to the fruits of our actions. We are only entitled to the actions themselves. And the male planets do better when they're looking for a specific result, whereas the female planets just want to do that action. That's why they would do well in Rohini. Very interesting. I've been even wanting to do a section here, and we could kind of do it here where we talk about, Rahu and Ketu in this nakshatra. If Ketu is in Rohini, we could see that being a tough thing. There's a past life insistence on the creative patience and abundance that Rohini represents. But Ketu, because it's a past life insistence, it's unconscious in a way that we always feel antagonized by wherever Ketu is. Ketu can do well in some signs, but what we read is that the nodes are a little bit too, like, pure, raw, synthetic intelligence applied to Rohini. It's like somebody who bleaches the nature of romance. It's like, there's a guy who wrote a book, and it's called The Game. And he talks about how to deal with the psychology of women in order to attract them and to be a player at a party or whatever and to get lots of chicks. At the very end of the game, I think that the author, I read some of it when I was a teenager just to see what it was about. And at the end, he even gets sick of his own psychological understanding of the arousal of women. It became robotic for him. And this is kind of the same way when you are robotic or that level of understanding of the world of abundance, the world of the passion of bringing things together. K2 there is going to get sick of the process, and the process is the whole thing. It's like somebody who is compelled to make a lot of things grow. And I've known people who have Ketu and Rohini who feel like it's a past life thing that they lean on to wait for things to grow, and they hate it. But they will still be compelled to do that thing. It depends on the Lord. In this case, if it's in Gemini, how Mercury is placed will show how the person uses that node. There's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about the node in a nakshatra. But both of the nodes essentially are not made in a way to work well with this. And it shows you that you have to learn how to be patient, learn the ways of feminine abundance and procreation. Same thing with the north node, Rahu, in Rohini. In that case, the person will have never had the patience to learn the process of arousal. So now they really want to get into what arousal is. And essentially they blow their top too quick in the male equivalent. But even for females, they want to have the experience of slowly, deliciously enjoying the bringing up of any arousal experience. And the nature of arousal is that you'll pop the champagne bottle too quick. You won't enjoy the process. A champagne bottle is like that symbol of kind of going too fast with the arousal process. It pops and it goes everywhere. And that's all fun and games until you find yourself dreaming of wanting to sustain the arousal experience. And this isn't just a sexual metaphor. Again, this is a metaphor with everything. Somebody with the nodes in Rohini might want to learn to be a good guitarist, and they just want to start getting there fast, and they can't learn to enjoy practicing scales. They have to apply themselves to enjoy learning that because the nodes are there, or any masculine planets. Again, this can work if you have a masculine planet here, or one of the nodes here, or a malefic planet here. You just have to learn the ways of Rohini, of arousal. I recommend Tantra for anyone who finds themselves in such a position or a predicament. Hello, H. Yes, we are talking about arousal. Rohini is the nakshatra where we most certainly would be talking about arousal. Now, Vic Dicara has this cool little section in each part of his book where he gives a general life lesson about the nature of arousal and of Rohini and of abundance, of prajapati. So let's read what Vic says about the general nature of what this nakshatra conveys, because all the nakshatras convey the essence of wisdom given in the Vedas, as we are going to see. What Vic tells us is that you can't grow crops without water. So one lesson this sutra teaches is that we shouldn't expect anyone, our partner, or anyone else, to be beautiful, fertile, stimulating, and inspiring unless we give them lots of water in the form of attention, affection, and practical care, practical emotional attunement. The water we pour into our partners benefits us as much as it benefits them. The water we give is the water that we are. When crops flourish, they are happy, and we enjoy their flavor and nutrition. We want to make our plants nice and happy. Now, another lesson is that people in the feminine role, those who are beautiful, inspiring, arousing, stimulating, and creative, will always crave water. That's attention and affection. So those who give affection and attention in this stimulating way need to be stimulated back. I know this from my experience with my own girlfriend in being in a relationship with her. I'm a musician, and she is someone who's very passionate about the music that I make. It's a hot process to have somebody who's stimulated by what you create, by me. So she is my Rohini in this way. I don't think either of the two of us have any planets in Rohini, but this goes to show you that just like when we have an empty house in astrology, there's no planets in the sign of Leo, you still have Leo in your chart. And in the same way, Rohini comes through me and my girlfriend. She stimulates me to create, and she inspires me. She's a muse that gets me to, that pushes me through that delicious pressure, the Rohini aroused pressure, to create the things that I love, which I know that she loves. And when I return the enjoyment of that to her, she is reciprocally, the water has to go both ways in this way. And she wants to do it more because I show her appreciation for it. It's just my own lived example of what we're talking about here. Those who are beautiful, inspiring, arousing, stimulating, and creative will crave water in return. It's attention and affection. This craving can easily make us dysfunctional and push us into very poor decisions, this craving for this kind of creative stimulation. Our hunger for love will make us chase after any water sources who appear on our radar, and then we'll jump through whatever hoops they hold up. This kind of resonates, I think, with Brahma. I think there is something about Rohini as being prajapati, relating to the progenitor Brahma, coming before Mrigashirsha, which is the gentle doe. What they say is that Brahma almost went and raped, I think, his own daughter or some kind of doe figure because there was too much of this arousal that became abysmal for him. Appaha, at its best nature, represents like a sustainable recycling of affection and this stimulation. So what Vic tells us is the key to avoiding this dysfunction is to appreciate and fully utilize whatever water we currently receive, to produce whatever flowers of creativity and inspiration it can manage to produce. This will attract water sources towards us. When you can take in the water energy of someone else and produce and be reflective and say, I appreciate the water that you're giving me, or the water that I'm being given is creating these joys and fruits, that actually attracts people to give us more water. It's a very interesting psychedelic picture. Teresa saying she watched me and my girlfriend's music video. I'm so glad that you enjoyed that, Teresa. That's sweet. Teresa's wondering if pictures of deers are a good remedy for this rohini affliction, if you have too much of this desire to be stimulated and you're not finding it. That's an interesting thought, because a doe is patient. It goes and eats its little bits of herbs in its slow, patient way. And Mrigashirsha, the gentle doe, is the next nakshatra. So that's worth pondering, Teresa. I can't say I really know. Teresa's asking if a picture of a gentle doe would be almost like a good remedy for rohini. I think that you're on the right track there. I think the main picture here is a gentle acceptance of the water that you receive from others. Because a lot of people have a hard time accepting love, accepting that they can be in the exchange of hot, aroused energy between themselves and another person. The person who has the gift of really Venus can accept that hot energy and convey it and show appreciation for it. And that's a funny thing about Venus, is that our joy draws the love of others, because those others want to have their own joy lived through the other person's experience. That's why when we're having really a good juicy romp with somebody, one of the hottest things that they can do for us is achieve orgasm or achieve a delicious, like, you know, that rapture of them is hot for us, because it's arousing for me, for you to be turned on by what I'm doing. It's this mutual cyclical thing. So it's that ability to enjoy and be overjoyed by what you receive from others that brings the mutual arousal that stimulates and continues. Really what this comes down to is accepting the tantric flow of passionate energy, being willing to be a part of it. And it takes a self-love in order to do that. I think that would be the biggest remedy, is accepting self-love, and that you are worthy of arousal. You are worthy of the enjoyment of the senses and the human experience. Please enjoy it, because the other person wants you to enjoy it for their sake. Now, let's read our supplication here, ladies and gentlemen. The supplication is what Vic Dicara gives us as a little sort of prayer that gives us an essence of how we can apply Rohini in our own lives. Rohini is Prajapati, the abundance bringer's wife. Her vast cosmic form sparkles beautifully. May she give us very enriched results from our endeavors. Goddess Rohini is in the ascended east. She arouses the cosmos with inspiring delight. She creates and nourishes the procreator's drive. May she allow our endeavors to delight our souls. Very interesting. I'm wondering when Vic refers to the ascended east, I wonder if he's giving an eastward demarcation towards Kritika and Rohini. Almost like Rohini is the second house from the first house that is Kritika, which is the first sign. When we read the Taittiriya Brahmana, we read the sutras that are given in the Taittiriya Brahmana, Kritika is regarded as the first nakshatra, not Ashwini, but Kritika. Rohini being the second nakshatra, I'm wondering if Kritika has an eastwardness, like the first house of the nakshatras in a way. Again, this is me. This is what you can expect when you come to these Nakshatra Sutra series on my channel, is that I don't always know. I'm sort of a researcher who's digging up seeds that could be potentially interesting and useful to conceive of and think about for future generations of those of us digging into the very important symbology of the nakshatras. I should say thank you, Teresa. Teresa has reminded me that Michael Reed is the one who mentioned pictures of deers as being somewhat of a remedy for the things given in Rohini. And not Teresa yourself. But Teresa, I do appreciate you transmitting the message from Michael Reed. Vic says that Venus is so hard to see at sunrise and sunset we can see Venus. And that almost relates to the elusiveness of the deer, I'm wondering. Very cool. So, thank you all for being here. Now, I think I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. It's number 1, not number 2, so it should be quick. And then we are going to get into our final text for today, the divine forces of the lunar nakshatras, as portrayed in the Vedas. So if you guys want to hang out with me for just one moment, I'm going to be right back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a great, fun time. We have one more reading to make here, and this has to do with the native. The native of Rohini Nakshatra. And this is someone typically with the moon there, but as we read, we're going to be reading also this author's depiction of what might happen when you have certain, for example, they often will put the Lagnesha, which is the ascendant lord, in Rohini and showing what that might mean. So with that being said, this is a depiction of interpretive understandings of what it would mean to have planets in Rohini, but in particular the moon, as well as the Lagna. The moon, the Lagna, and the sun can especially be seen in what we describe as the native here. But really any emphasis of this nakshatra, whatever that means for the individual. Again, Vic Dicara has a great thing on his website where you can see which nakshatras are most emphasized in your chart. And in that thing, he does a report of the most emphasized nakshatra in your chart, even beyond just the moon, which is a different thing. So I recommend checking that out if you are interested in it. Now what we're looking at here is Rohini Nakshatra and a native of Rohini Nakshatra. Ruled by a nakshatra devata whose very essence is desire. Rohini imbues a powerful desire nature to its native. This is consistent with its Jyotisha classification as a human, Manusha, nakshatra, of the earth, Prithvi element. Although the elements I'm sketchy of. Some of the elements, the tattvas, are aligned with the nakshatras, but the elements begin their classification at Ashwini. So we have to remember, I should say this now too, is that much of what we read here is the interpretation style of this author who uses sidereal rashis and who also thinks, I believe, when I read it, she kind of she contends with the Vimshotari Lord of, for example, Rohini being ruled by the moon. So there's might be a bit of dirtied up knowledge in here. We're going to read it and see what kind of cream we can separate from the runny milk of this author's particular interpretation. The most prolific of nakshatras, Rohini is notorious for progeny. The Rigvedic character of Daksha, Prajapati, and Aditi give birth to 12 sons, the Adityas. And Puranic Daksha has 60 daughters. So Daksha being Prajapati, being the deity of this nakshatra. Rohini's fecundity extends to material success and opulence. Such prosperity is most often attributable to the resourceful and self-sufficient nature of this native. when we listen to the stories of Prajapati, we learn that he never once seeks advice, assistance, or consensus when it comes time to create. He just spills that seed. Frequently, a single notable feat or extraordinary accomplishment will catapult the Rohini native into stardom, just as the sole act of creation made Prajapati the most talked about devata in the Brahmanas. Indeed, under favorable chart conditions, all things can grow and prosper for the native born in Rohini. Rohini's fertility extends to other areas as well. Having the stellar configuration of a wain, an ox cart, this nakshatra is particularly auspicious for agricultural fruitfulness. The Rohini native exhibits a keen knack for gardening and cultivation of plants. He or she may be predisposed to professions in agri-science, permaculture, horticulture, agriculture, and so on. The hallmark of the Rohini narrative is an appreciation for nature and familiarity with her cycles and rhythms. Prajapati is famous not only for manifesting earthly vegetation, but as well for having created herded animals like horses, goats, and cows. This characteristic instills in the native a fondness for domesticated or farm animals. However, Prajapati's greatest faculty is creative skillfulness. Remember, the other name for Prajapati given in the Rig Veda is Daksha. And Daksha means skillfulness, expertise is really the word. Oh, I've got to stretch for a moment. Oh, that felt really good. This is likely expressed by the Rohini native through a multitude of avenues, depending upon the overall inclinations of the birth chart. This can give skills in visual arts, such as drawing, painting, handcrafts, and ceramics. It can give rise to skills in performing and fine arts, such as dance, song, theater, and drama, or in related fields of songwriting, stage crafting, costume design, and so on. Any and all forms of creative expression requiring physical agility and ingenious intellect fall under Rohini. It's cool because we can even see transits. We can see eclipses happening in Rohini. We can see new moons and full moons. Any important planet transiting Rohini will bring out these characteristics for that time. Now, several notable performers have Rohini prominent in their birth charts. One such individual is Leontine Price, who has the moon in Rohini. This person is an opera singer who achieved worldwide superstardom. Now, in the actress category is Greta Garbo, who has Jupiter in Rohini. Possessing great physical beauty, another hallmark feature of Rohini, Garbo was one of Hollywood's greatest movie stars. Now, there's Greta Garbo and Martha Graham are described as this author as having the rising sign in Rohini, but we know she's a sidereal author, so I want to give that caveat that she might have the bias of that here. But Jupiter, for these people, was in Rohini. So Martha Graham had Jupiter in Rohini, and this person, Martha Graham, acclaimed the leading exponent of modern dance. And this illustrates Rohini's creative energy expressed through dance. Now, Krishna is said to have Rohini in his nakshatra, in his lagna. You know, you'll have to excuse me, folks, because I've got to get my astronomy right here. It seems to me that even though the lagna would be in a different sign, it would still be in that nakshatra. So we can say that Greta Garbo and Martha Graham have their lagna and Jupiter in Rohini. Excuse me for messing that up. I was just thinking about the fact that we read that Krishna has a Rohini lagna. Lagna meaning the rising sign. So we could see that Krishna, this is what's given in the Bhagavad Mahapurana. Krishna is defined as having Rohini Nakshatra on the rising sign. And Krishna is the godly embodiment of this nakshatra. Like Prajapati's daughter, Krishna has divine physical beauty. Krishna is an expert in song, dance, and music, as well as in the art of lovemaking. Now, although arguably the most materialistic of the 27 nakshatras, Rohini is fully capable of inspiring a spiritual path. Prajapati was especially skilled in the performance of sacrificial worship. In fact, it was Prajapati who taught the other gods the way of the sacrifice. Thus, an appreciation and adeptness for spiritual knowledge and sacerdotal rituals may flourish under this nakshatra. Still, life for the Rohini native is not always all that it's cracked up to be, especially when it comes to familial relationships. One can imagine the reality show The First Cosmic Family, starring Puranic duo Brahma and son Daksha as figureheads for the most dysfunctional family in the history of the gods. Their dysfunction is understandable, since no previous domestic role model existed. If Rohini is unafflicted, then novel or unique family dynamics are substituted for dysfunctional. For examples of this include, yeah, I can see what this is saying here. Well, I'm going to say this, and I think what this is saying here is that if Rohini is unafflicted, then we might find novel or unique family dynamics. Okay, I am reading this correctly. So the author is not saying at all that this is necessarily dysfunctional, but someone with an emphasis of Rohini can experience unique, novel, different from from typical sexual procreation in terms of the roots of your family. Such as, for example, she gives the example of a gay couple who employ a surrogate or an in vitro fertilization to give birth to quadruplets. That is not the typical male husband, female wife coming together and having children. But if Rohini is unafflicted, these kind of things can happen, and the person can still be a person who exists just like everybody else. And especially if Rohini is well placed, then even a strange family dynamic like this can give birth to some beautiful people. Now, although this nakshatra is immensely favorable for progeny, we note that Puranic Brahma, what we read about Brahma in the Puranas, is that he faces many obstacles when it comes to children. We recall Brahma's rage when his mind-born son, Daksha, rejects Brahma's fatherly guidance, and they refuse to procreate. So Brahma has these children, and they refuse to listen to his orders. And this enrages him. We also have the character of Sandhya and her act of defiance when, spurning her father's love, she surrenders her life to the fire. That's one of the stories that we would read in the section of Prajapati. Sandhya is the daughter of Daksha, who gets frustrated because of Daksha and Brahma's weird ways, and she spurns his love and burns herself up in a fire. Familial difficulties extend to the broader family unit, where infighting, jealousy, envy, and deception may be the norm for the family of one who has significant placements in Rohini. On the other hand, kudos is in order for this native's readiness to go to the ends of the earth, to assist family and friends, just as Prajapati forsook his own immortality for the benefit of humanity. So there is an ability in this nakshatra to sacrifice, to make all the ends meet, and to resolve any issues that occur. Imbuing a powerful libido, Rohini may cause difficulty in relationships. This theme is consistent throughout the Vedic and Puranic literature. If gravely afflicted in Rohini, then we might see inappropriate, brash, or reckless sexual behavior. The perpetual need to satiate physical urges, even familial incest, can be part and parcel for this nakshatra. We recall that Brahma distorts his own physicality, i.e., he grows 4 additional heads and, on another occasion, transforms himself into a stag. And he does these things in order to satisfy his lustful nature. So indeed, the Rohini native, when afflicted, is likely to be indulgent when it comes to life's physical pleasures, even transforming themselves, doing things they wouldn't normally do, just to gratify these physical pleasures. Now we read that Brahma's love of shenanigans invites public dismay and may bring grave repercussions, including physical injury. Brahma, after all, is pierced by Rudra's arrow and later loses one of his 5 heads due to this behavior of his. Similarly, indiscreet or improper behavior by the Rohini native is unlikely to escape the notice of others and may result in injury to the native. All sorts of perversions of all sorts can happen through this nakshatra. This nakshatra is a good example of why we need to practice forgiveness, but still apply just judgment to people who do things of a sexually perverted nature. We don't need to completely drop a person off the face of the earth or, not forgive them, not allow them to have the space of forgiveness. But we do need to give justice for someone who's, for example, who does some kind of like incestuous, like a peeping Tom that looks through the window at people and wants to masturbate while watching people do their regular things, or someone who's like a pedophile, or these kinds of people who do these sexually perverse behaviors. We need to set an example so that such people are not allowed to continue such behavior. But, ideally, we want to, through stories like this, we can understand and sympathize why these characters come through with these kind of natures. And, at least we can have compassion for them while still deliberating what needs to be deliberated in terms of judgment towards things that they've done or that they do. It's the Vedic world encapsulates all possible things that could ever possibly happen, even weird, shadowy stuff like what we're reading right now. Better to talk about it and be aware of these things than to not talk about it and for it to be a shadow. I think that's what I'm picking up from today's discussion. So ultimately, those who engage in this kind of perverse sexual things and physical gratification at the expense of others will probably get some kind of just desserts for those things that they're doing if there is afflictions to Rohini. Now, finally, mention should be made of Brahma's own self-appreciation. Creating the universe is more than just an admirable, but Brahma-centric attitude does bring trouble. Rarely in the Puranas does Prajapati accept any devata as his equal, even co-triad partners Shiva and Vishnu. His elitist attitude results in his own demise. So hence, under unfavorable chart conditions, the larger-than-life Rohini ego may cause problems for the native as well. And this is something that the character of Rohini needs to take care of in going about what they do with themselves and with their lives. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, this has been our reading today on the nakshatra Rohini and on the character of Prajapati, which is Rohini's residing deity, as Brahma, the progenitive creator of it all. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you guys have been having a great time hanging out with me while I move through and talk about all this fun nakshatra stuff. I do plan on going through all the nakshatras. I think I'm going to cut these videos down so that it's only the stuff by Vic and Ernst that's available on this video. And then later on, I'm going to have a separate video for what's given in the nakshatras, because it's very long and it's very involved. It's mostly for people who are into Vedic literature. So for those who have been hanging out with me for this, thank you so much. I love you all. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, H. Thank you, Irene Mack. And thank you, Susie Underwood, for all hanging out with me and being a part of this podcast today. I'm so glad Susie says that she's been enjoying the Vedic knowledge, and I'm so glad to hear that. There's so much there. And this book that I got, I'm very happy to be reading it to you all because there's so much there. And there's more to come, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. Stay tuned. I love doing this stuff. I love moving through this knowledge. So you can expect that instead of me reading it by myself, I would rather hang out with you guys and do it and get two birds stoned at once. At the same time, it's a Canadian phrase. At the same time that I get to read what is inside this book, I get to share it with you all. And I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Stay tuned next week. We're going to be going through more. We're either going to go through more nakshatra stuff or I might do something else. So stay tuned with what we got going on next week, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eventually, we're going to be doing them on Thursdays. I'll be letting you guys know when that goes on. Have an excellent Sunday. Thanks to everybody for hanging out and watching with me. Many blessings to all. Sat Nam. Namaste. Thanks for watching. Take care, folks. I hope you enjoy.